to the University Leaders panel. Very excited to have you all here at the end of what's been a good but exhausting, I think, conference, and on the heels of Andre Agassi speaking and mesmerizing many of us. So appreciate you joining. My name is Michael Horn from Entangled Solutions, an innovation services firm, and thrilled to have a really distinguished group talking about colleges, universities, both challenges and innovations in their midst. To my immediate left is my friend Henry Eyring, the incoming president of BYU-Idaho, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Then we have Javier Miyares from the University of Maryland University College. Thrilled to have you here. Lisa Wardell, the president of DeVry University. Then we have Kevin Gilligan, CEO of Capella Education. And last but certainly not least, Philly Mantella, where we both live in the Boston area, the CEO of the Professional Advancement Network at Northeastern. So thrilled to have you all here. And where I'd love to start the conversation is really just zoom out from your institution and think about higher education sector more broadly. And what do you all see as the big challenges facing the sector right now, the one or two things that you think really need to be paying attention or solving this? And anyone feel free to jump in here.
I can go. I think the big challenge continues to be the cost of higher education. Until we sort of address that as an industry, the country is going to have problems. We need to continue to produce graduates, etc. But with the cost, an associated phenomenon for me is we know that there has to be lifelong learning for everybody. We cannot expect folks to pay for first a degree and then continue to get in debt, and they need to continue to update their skills, their education. So cost is, in that macro level, I think continues to be an issue.
You know, I would build on Javier's comments in that it's cost and the associated value of that education, right? So when we think about cost or affordability, and we think about the workforce skills gap that we've talked a lot about at this conference, we really need to be able to provide students as an industry. We need to provide them with the ROI on their education. And I think that that's going to address the cost issue, as well as really thinking about corporate partnerships and corporate businesses and industry as part of the payer mix when we think about addressing affordability for students.
Let me add the perspectives of sort of pace and pace of the progress and how we kind of look at that, how we're structured for our pace and rhythm around change. But also, I think that it's about institutional views that too frequently are inside out rather than outside in. And our structures are reinforcing of that in some ways. And so it's really being able to re-architect structures, re-architect timing to meet the speed of the market and meet the market where it is, or we'll be identifying gaps and filling gaps over time rather than to sort of fix the fundamental underlying issues that I think we have.
Yeah, so I'll chime in as well. So I agree. I think, at a broad level, access, affordability, completion are all big challenges. But to me, at the heart of it is what Lisa mentioned, is closing the skills gap. I mean, the reality, and we serve working adults, so at least in our world, the reality is the reason people are borrowing money and getting a bachelor's degree or advanced degree is to improve their employment outcomes. And that's the bottom line. And I think for higher education to be viable in the future, we have to do a better job of addressing the skills gap. Because if we do that well, we're not only going to create value, but we're also going to help to impact wages, which really is important in this country. We got to get out of the situation with stagnant wages. And so therefore, from my way of thinking, the real challenge is going to be new models. Because I think if we're going to close the skills gap and we're going to do it with affordability and completion, it's going to take new models. We talk at Capella talk a lot about competency-based learning and some new models around that. But I think higher education is going to have to continue to innovate around outcomes. To me, that's the central challenge.
I think that challenge of outcomes could be a blessing not only to those students as they graduate, but as they start traditional programs. I'm increasingly looking at what's happening at BYU-Idaho. We take great pride in admitting students who otherwise wouldn't be deemed prepared for college, but we lose them at a very high rate. I think part of the challenge may be that we introduce them in that first year to our general education, our liberal education courses. And for many of them, not just those who didn't perform well in high school, but even the most gifted students, they don't connect to the end, to the outcomes. Stephen Covey is famous for saying you've got to begin with the end in mind. I think we need to begin with the beginning more on our minds. How do we get a college student, whatever their level of preparation is, really engaged in the higher education learning process right from the beginning? I think if we do that, then the dichotomy between a traditional liberal education and a more career-oriented or education, I think it begins to fade a bit. And the key is to, right at the beginning, I think, capture the imagination of every learner.
Do you all feel that the engagement question is something that, at a structural level, but also individual at your own campuses, is something you're constantly trying to crack to unleash the student motivation piece to continue to persist?
Yeah, I mean, for us, most definitely, and I think sort of building on that point, we're on challenges, but an opportunity we have, right, is more than ever before we're able to get the big data, and the small data for that matter, on an individual basis to really figure out where the intervention points are and how we can customize, if you will, that experience to address exactly the points that Henry's making. But it is a challenge for us, for sure.
I was going to say that at Capella, our biggest challenges are the first 4 quarters, the early cohorts. And again, you have to keep in mind who we serve. We serve working adults, and so these are extremely busy people. They're working full-time, they're raising families, and it's a real challenge for them to engage. So it's a different kind of challenge than, let's say, with a first-time, full-time college student. But we have found that by doing more intake assessment and really understanding where they need more support, and maybe even organizing their early courses, we group them in. So let's say I need help in reading. Being grouped with other people that need help in reading, as an example, or writing, has been useful. Using data analytics for intervention, predictive analytics, case management, much more intensive support. Because our experience has been, once they get past that 4th quarter, the retention rates are very high. They've sort of figured it out and got their groove on. And so I support the comments.
Actually, I think it's likely to be true of all of us. At UMUC also, it's that first chunk, which is like what happens in traditional institutions. It's a freshman year. It's the challenge that we face, being mostly online, is how do you create that sense of engagement and belonging in a visual environment? While it is a challenge, I believe that we'll see in the future, precisely because of analytics, technology, etc., that we may end up having more opportunities to engage at a deeper level than even perhaps a traditional institution with a residential campus. It's really the promise of technology in the online environment.
At Northeastern, our model is around the experience being a part of the learning process. So that in the course of a traditional undergraduate curriculum, students are, they're engaging in 18 months of experience, they're engaging in different locales in 160 different countries. So it's about really the theory and the practice deepening the learning, and it deepens the engagement. So the opportunity that they're getting to sort of navigate their own learning space and make choices and go deep in practice and decide what they like and don't like. And you might think, oh, that's interesting, but that's a model for the 18 to 22-year-olds. But it's really not, because when you apply that to the lifelong learner and you start to contemplate what does work, they may be smaller chunks, they may be projects that you mount, They may be opportunities to have the learning in different contexts for very short duration. What does it do for engagement? What does it do for not having to make the forced choice between, okay, I gotta have time to, I'm a busy adult and I have to have time to learn, because the two become the same, in many ways. So it's deployed very differently, but the concept of engagement is very deep, very rich. And retention is one of the byproducts, but it's almost the basic byproduct. It's, okay, they're here and they're graduating, but have they come away with more self-understanding? Have they come away with more experience that they can immediately translate into the work world? So, that's kind of where our excitement is that you can see if it's all throughout the educational process. It's not a bridge afterwards. It's just the way in which you structure the curriculum, the power of engagement.
And I think that brings us back to innovation, if I can. So if I think about engagement, it's not just engagement in the first 4 quarters, but in the United States, most institutions are struggling to grow their enrollments. And the reality is let's take adults, there's tens of millions of adults out there that have some college credits but not a degree. And I know from our own experience, when we lose applicants, it's usually not because it's of a competitive issue. It's they lack the confidence to step in, engage, and take it on, right? And so some don't, some don't make it through 4 quarters, and then a percentage that do make it through. How can we innovate? How can we make our learning models and our experiences more flexible, for example, for working adults, so it does fit better into their life? Because I really think that the big opportunity is to get more people engaged, not just how do we make the ones that come in successful, but how do we make the pie bigger? Because they're going to need those skills in the workplace. And it comes back to me, my conclusion is the models as they have historically existed only serve part of the market, and there's a big part of the market that's looking for new models of getting the job done. And I think that's a real opportunity for the industry.
And ultimately, right, that goes back to scale, right, and trying to crack that nut between the use of technology, as Javier is saying, but then also, as an example for us, and we think about engagement, we are really driving peer relationships, particularly as it relates to that first year, because of that confidence question, not only for the students who are coming in or are potentially coming in and need that confidence, but then also for those who have gone through that first chunk or two, as you said, it also is self-fulfilling and continues to build for them. But it's a scale issue in terms of the number of students you have that need that.
If I may piggyback on something you said about the industry, higher ed, indeed, there are millions, tens of millions of adults who need access. On one hand, that is both an opportunity and is very appealing for a traditional institution that is hurting for enrollments. On the other hand, I think that if you just go into the adult space because you want to make money to subsidize your home campus, it may not be as easy or as forthcoming to really transform yourself into an institution that is totally focused on the learner and on the needs of the adults. I think that's the challenge for the traditional institutions. How can they tap into that market when historically they may come from a different tradition?
I think one of the things as we sort of depict what are some of the challenges of our learners, we've got to be careful because they're as different as we probably are, in terms of what their challenges are. So I think one of the things that higher ed needs to do a better job at is really assessing where the learner is at, going beyond the traditional metrics, finding a starting point, being clear what could really provide where they're way ahead in confidence, but they're very low on really testing or trying fields that they think they're interested in, or whatever the case may be. So finding that starting point, but also articulating what beyond our structures, their majors, what their real mission is, and what they're really trying to achieve, and then mounting our assets in such a way that it helps them to get there and accelerates that path. Because otherwise, I think we have to be careful of our own formulas, whether it's our metrics at the front end or our movement metrics in throughput or the output.
So I'm curious, this has created a great backdrop of challenge, also points to a lot of opportunity,
Oh, yes.
and then innovation comes from there. So as you look at your own campuses, what are one or two initiatives or innovations that you're working on that you're really excited about that you think is game-changing against this equation?
Yeah, I would say just building off of that challenge, for us, it's really around it's been alluded to, but the student services in and around and outside the classroom, if you will. So we have to get the classroom and that experience, whether it's hybrid or online only or on campus, we have to get that right from a technology and interaction perspective. But as Phil mentioned, all of the students are very different, and so what we have is we call it CARE, DeVry CARE. It started in our Chamberlain nursing program, Chamberlain University, where we really try to surround the student, particularly coming in, but really through all to completion of, once we have those students, there are students, and our job is for them to complete, and we need to help them navigate the life gets in the way pieces of this. Some of it is based on, having those real life interaction and skill sets that help them merge. I love how you said that, merge the being a real life busy working adult and being a student. And then part of it is just, having that understanding that they're going to be working full or part-time, that they have dependents, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to sort of cater to that across our institutions. And we're having some real success in terms of how the students are viewing this experience and their persistence levels.
I love your comments. In higher ed, it seems to me that sometimes we start asking the question, what's wrong with the student that he or she cannot succeed?
Yes.
You're starting the question, what can I do? What's wrong with the way we do business? How can we do business better so the student can succeed? I think that's key. In our case, we are very proud of how we have decreased the cost of education by introducing open educational resources across the curriculum. That has required a lot of effort, and as we are finding out, it's going to be a stronger effort to keep those resources curated. But that's a big initiative for us. And the other one, we are a public institution. We thus have a responsibility to the citizens of Maryland. So we have come out with what we call a completion scholarship. Every Maryland Community College graduate who comes to UMUC will guarantee that they will pay no more than $20,000 in tuition and fees for the 4 years. And we want to see how we can bring that down. The issue is, how do you do that? That's where we think a lot of the analytics, we invested heavily. We actually spun off an analytics unit, Helio Campus. We think that's part of our future of both increasing the success of the students and decreasing the cost. Is that equation that we are after?
Can I just, before others jump in, can you just double click on that a little bit more? On the analytics, how is that going to drive down the cost? Is it improving efficiencies? Is it, what is?
Sure, that's a great question. Let me, for instance, the first year that we really implemented, we were able to invest and have a robust analytics unit. We were able to increase the number of new students by 20% while reducing the cost of advertising by 20%. Now, my colleagues in the for-profit sector have been much more advanced than we have in terms of use of the analytics. So that is a real efficiency savings for us. We found out through analytics that we thought we were doing students a favor by letting them wait until the last minute to enroll. They are busy. Well, those late shoppers actually don't do well. So we put in a 4 or 5 days limit. That has increased our course completion rates and our enrollment rates. All this is data-driven, the way we manage and the way we deal with students.
Henry?
I think what we're all feeling is the tremendous challenge, but the value of getting that student engaged and getting them feeling successful early on. And that requires a significant mind shift for us. I mean, even in our lifetimes, that was not the model under which we were educated. And yet, it's the expectation of the upcoming generation. The digital natives now are upon us, and they're always in charge, for better or worse. They're always in charge. And so somehow we've got to strike the balance. We have that responsibility as trustees of knowledge, and we've been out there. We know what the real world is going to be like. So we have to bring all of that to bear, while at the same time giving them the impression, and I think you can't do that without giving them some of the reality of feeling that they're making decisions, that they are the ones driving their learning forward. They've got their own, the problems that they'd like to solve, and how we cultivate that and then build curriculum around it and then scale it up I think it's the intellectual challenge of the century.
And are there specific things that you guys have done at BYU-Idaho to start to tackle that course redesign and engagement much earlier and so forth?
Yeah, it would be too much to say that we've tackled it. I think we know what needs to be different. I think all of us have a sense that we need to be, again, empowering the student more, thinking more in terms of the extent that we're assessing. It's more formative. It's more a matter of keeping them engaged, even as we provide the necessary correction and redirection. And technology could be a part of that. Clay predicted this in his book. Were you a co-author on Disrupting Class?
Might have been.
Okay.
If you were on Innovative University. Then.
Yeah, okay. The technology does put us in a position, if it's properly used, to introduce a lot of choicefulness into the education process. And I find, in my own case, I've got 5 children with a 10-year gap between the first 3 who are BYU-Idaho graduates and the last 2 who are in that pipeline. And that 10 years it's a full generation different. And these folks are much less motivated by a particular grade than by the opportunity to be autonomous. And technology is going to make that possible in ways we've just got to discover.
So Michael, you asked about innovation.
Yeah.
And things we're particularly excited about. So I would mention 2 at Capella. The first is our FlexPath program. So for those maybe that aren't familiar with it, the FlexPath program allows students to earn their degree through the demonstration of competencies as opposed to the accumulation of credit hours. And it's eligible for federal financial aid. So this is not a model that's for everybody, but for working adults who come into the course room in their middle of their career and bring a lot of competencies to the course room, it gives them the potential to move significantly faster through the degree program. And as a result, spend less money, borrow less money, get their degree, and get the employment outcome they were seeking. And we're seeing really great success with it. And my own view is that just like online learning became a category over the last 20 years, I can see flexible learning compared to credit hour approaches. And there's still going to always be need for credit hour, but I can see that becoming a new category as well. And our early experience has been that, to use the disruptive innovation language, we're bringing non-consumers in because they looked at the credit hour model and said, I can't fit that into my busy life, and I don't want to spend money in a course room tied to the credit hour on topics I already know. But if I can move much more quickly through that and still have it be academically rigorous and spend my time learning the things I don't know, that's a better value proposition. So we're really excited about that. The second one is outside the university environment, but I mentioned it because I think it's part of this example of new model innovation I think is necessary. We have a partnership with Career Builder on something called Right Skill. And Right Skill is aimed at working with employers to identify where do they have big supply-demand imbalances, where can't they find adequate supplies of certain skilled labor, And then we use our competency-based learning at scale to develop learning solutions, and we use Career Builder's consumer data at scale to find potential applicants. We upskill them in 4 to 6 weeks around very specific competencies, and we place them with the employer. So the employer wins because they can't find the skilled labor, and the student wins because they've moved from a job that was paying X to a job that's paying significantly better than that. And the innovation really started with looking at the problem through the demand side and not the supply side, and then combining competency-based learning at scale with big data at scale to create a whole new model. So it's still early days, but I can tell you we're working with over 30 employers, lots of interest in this on their part. And it solves one of the biggest problems that higher education has, who pays, right? Does the student pay, the government pay, the employer? This is a case where the employer is happy to pay because it's solving an enterprise problem for them.
I mean, I love both of those initiatives, and I love the way you're positioning them in the market. It's really, really exciting. It's a hard question for me because most of you are looking at my title and goes, what's a professional advancement network at Northeastern University? So my whole life is about innovation, new models, trying to do them at scale. And at our R1, Research One University, top 40 traditional models, but not wholly and solely traditional models because of the sort of co-op DNA of the place, that it really welcomes the sort of the world of work and the world of higher ed to be without joins, are joined at the seams.
By the way, for those who don't know what you all do at Northeastern and with the co-op model, it might maybe do a 30-second
Sure. So,
explanation
Northeastern University's an interesting case study in higher education. It's, moved more than any institution in the traditional rankings into the top 40. We have 54,000 applicants for 2,800 seats on the traditional university side. And I think what's really, I'd love to tell you that it was my brilliant work, but I think what's really driving it is that the fundamental sort of university offering of being able to get high quality traditional education, but embedded is these periods of work where students can take them locally, they can take them globally, they can make different choices, they can integrate it into their curriculum. So in 4 to 5 years, they get 12 to 18 months of work experience in 4 to 6 month periods. My life is really about how do you, and another interesting thing about Northeastern is it doesn't buy the forced choices of one, we wear one hat. We're a private selective institution, and that's what we do. We actually think the diversification of our offerings is important to the health of the university. We think we've got to be involved in the new models and really be disrupting ourselves. And so what we've really done is we've created a space called the Professional Advancement Network. And what I try to really figure out is what are some of the innovations that we can get participation inside and that the market wants outside, and how to serve them up, how to test them, how to get them up quickly, how to bring them to scale. So I'll give you a couple of examples of some things that we have been working on. First is our campus network. We have a global campus network. We have our acting dean in Seattle in the room. One of 4 sites. Our first global site is Toronto. But these are lean facilities in cities that are have been growing in particular industry sectors where the higher ed supply is not keeping up. Wonderful institutions, a lot of participants and players, but far more need and demand in these high skill areas. And we're coming in to say we are an institutional player and partner with you. So we're here, we're present, and we're thinking about how we create new models by being closer to where these pressure points are. So they're laboratories for our new models. And are birthing things like our analytics bootcamp, our IoT bootcamp, our Align program, which bridges a student with co-op, and some core interest in math aptitude into computer science in a master's field. So these are laboratories for us. They're also places for the distribution of our content, their employer relationships, they're being of a community. And we're now at a pivot point where we've gotten enough resonance, so my work is sort of over to the right, but connected to the university, that it started to get pulled more central. In our newest academic plan, we're saying, how can these campuses enrich our undergraduate programs, enrich our research agenda with new connections, and be these laboratories for new offerings in their regions. So that's one example. The second example I'd offer is what we call our XN Project Network. And it really is for the working adults. How do we mount authentic work experience project? The employer gets these great students, adult learners who are trying to figure out what's next as individuals and teams, 4 to 6 weeks. And we've gone from starting our first that we incubated in our new ventures program to 500 employers and 1,800 adult learners in less than 9 months. So we're also trying to learn, lots of mistakes, lots of things I could spend the day talking about, but how you do scale quickly and how you take in what you're learning and then how you sort of cascade it across the organization. So that's the space I live in. It's new, it's fun, and it's great to be here with all you innovators.
Well, so it's interesting, actually, you use the word boot camp also, and I think 3 of you have boot camps. Maybe worth spending a couple minutes thinking about the boot camp industry and where it's going. 2 of you, interestingly enough, BYU-Idaho recently spun out an online program. You are a spin out of a campus. Just thinking about these, creating autonomy in these new models and maybe the boot camp specifically and what that means for the future of higher ed. I think we'd be interested to hear what all you think about that.
Yeah, I think, I think that the boot camp model really is synonymous with how do we customize both temporally as well as content for students who are not the model for a 4-year or even 2-year degree, right? So many of them are adult learners and full-time employed, looking for certain upskills, as Kevin mentioned, et cetera. So DeVry started, much like others did in terms of just pure coding. How can we learn? How can we take our curriculum and content that we already have in this area, and what needs to be different from a faculty, from a student experience, et cetera, to put these shorter-term programs in place. And then the second thing we did, which has already been talked about a bit, and I think we're all doing it in different ways and just to different extents to try to figure out scale, is we went to the demand side and talked to corporate employers and said, what is it that you need, and how can we be more helpful as a provider to these businesses in order, again, to change that payer mix and have those corporate payers really paying, because if they're paying, it is validating just the value of those education. So we started with coding, also expanded Internet of Things and other boot camps related to where our employers want to go. Cybersecurity is another perfect example for us where we've always had a curriculum as it relates to DeVry University, but we now have the shorter term certificates, great demand in that area. And the reason there's great demand is because we asked the employers what they wanted to see, what those folks needed to have. And of course, that industry is growing. It makes sense for us to be in places where there's a right to win. So we have to date done that organically. We do have a partnership because, again, the teaching and the modalities for the boot camps are somewhat different in terms of what you need from a faculty and student experience. And so we wanted to get in quickly, learn from our mistakes, and sort of modify to that extent. And that has really been part of the stepping stone and the step change for us in DeVry University as we think about getting those new student enrollments in far more of a customer service way. One of the big challenges for for higher education in general, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, is we don't think about our students as our customers, and therefore we don't care about customer experience the way that we should. I came into the industry just under a year ago from very different industries, and for me it's all about the customer. We have two sets. We have end user customers who are students who need the right experience, and we have customers who are taking those students as employees when they have, through these programs, the shorter as well as longer. So we have two sets of customer experience that we need to be managing all the time. And I know that it's uncomfortable for academia and higher ed to look at it that way, but if we did, we would really be tracking to the things that all of us care about, which are student outcomes. So that was a very long coding answer, but I think that's where we really put the line in the sand and said, this is why we want to go into coding or boot camps, I should say, as a student experience.
What
No, I was going to offer a couple additional comments. So we invested in two different coding schools because we see a massive market opportunity. I mean, software is eating the world, and digitization and coding is going to become it's becoming the language of business, and not just in the IT shop, but it's cutting across all functions. And so we're interested in it for the growth potential, but I think I think the coding schools are very instructive, should be instructive for higher education about new models. So why did the coding schools come to exist? Well, the employers had a huge demand for certain skill sets, and universities weren't producing them. And they weren't producing them in computer science courses. So you have computer science graduates, and they're being hired, but they can't do coding. And I think higher education missed an opportunity to create it. So innovators came in, entrepreneurs came in and said, we can create that model. And here's one of the things we've learned, at least it's been our experience. When coders are successfully completing their program, the employer isn't asking if you have a college degree. They're asking, what do you know, what can you do? Mm-hmm. And what that suggests to me is that I believe in the future, the degree, which historically has been proxy for something, has the potential to be replaced with competencies as a new currency. Because what employers want, they need skilled workers that can perform certain jobs and tasks. They need critical thinking and all those other skills. But to me, the fact that coding was able to emerge in the midst of such a massive industry just indicates the potential of innovative models and changing attitudes and maybe preferences by consumers and employers. Because what the coding schools are doing is creating the most direct path between learning and employment for a coding job. Most direct path means no wasted time, effort, or money, getting the skills you need to get a 21st century job. They don't need a college degree to do coding. Now, maybe they need a college degree down the road for something else later, but the economic lift that these people are getting from having benefited from coding is significant. And the other thing I'll just mention, one of the coding academies we own is in San Francisco. It's called Hackbart Academy. It's focused on changing the ratio of women in technology. Most of the women we're enrolling are coming out of Stanford, Berkeley, other schools in the Bay Area. They went to work for 5 or 6 years. They had a liberal arts degree. They always wanted to be in technology, but culturally were not encouraged to do so. And they're coming back in and launching new careers. So it's not just for people that, as an alternative for a college degree, it's for both. And I think the larger lesson is that the market's going to value models that create the most direct path between learning and employment. And that, I think, is a huge opportunity given the size of the higher education industry.
If I may add, a point you mentioned that I would like to underline. The Bootcamps, really, what it has introduced a range of providers that are not higher education institutions. That may be the beginning of a trend. Higher ed has simply not fulfilled that need. What we are doing is we are trying to shift our curriculum into experiential learning. And we believe that that's what both employers and students want. what am I learning, and what are you going to tell my employer that I learned? It's a different mindset that we have had in higher education. Simplistically, I never thought, for example, that transcripts were a big deal. Transcripts is a transcript. Well, it was and has been the case that a transcript was a transcript. But now the demand is, I don't care what course you took and what was your grade. I want to know what you learned. That is a different mindset. And if higher ed and your institutions are to be commended that you have responded to that. But I think if higher ed doesn't respond to that, we'll see more different providers coming into the market.
So let me ask, so this actually gets to the next question I want to ask, and we're starting to hit toward a limit, so we'll start going more lightning round-ish. But the question I'm curious about is, you look at peer institutions, not necessarily on the stage here, who are you looking to that's doing innovations that's inspiring you, making you think about stuff that you'd like to do in your campus, in your school? Or maybe it doesn't have direct relevance, you just think it's something that all of us ought to keep an eye on.
I have to say, personally, I look at FlexPath as a very fascinating experiment.
Thank you.
We're looking more outside the higher ed space, you know, looking at the Amazons, looking at the LinkedIns, looking at the other providers who are skillful at scaling, skillful at understanding their consumers, skillful at understanding where they are in the value chain, and trying to figure out how that applies to us.
You know, I would say, building on that, I agree with that. You know, the fundamental challenge in higher education is, how do we get the cost down, the outcomes up?
Yes.
Healthcare has the same problem. So I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned outside of higher education, like you're saying. I would also add to that, the thing that I find the most interesting, because I'm not an educator, I came from the business side, is the internet, digitization, it continues to disrupt business models, and it disaggregates them and reaggregates them in interesting ways that make them more efficient and more valuable. It's happening now in higher education, and so the companies that I pay attention to are the ones that are involved in the unbundling and rebundling, because those were the new I think that's where the new models will come, enabled by technology. I think that's where the new models will come from.
Which specific ones are you?
I would just say we try to watch as many as we can. You know, a lot of them are early stage, and it remains to be seen what the winning models will be, but I think there will be winning models. So we try to stay close to the action and understand, and where it makes sense to incorporate it. But I think that's a lot of future growth is going to come from that sort of business model innovation.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, healthcare was mentioned here. I think that while there's lessons obviously learned in that industry too, we're close to it because we have the professional schools in medicine and nursing, and we're seeing new delivery models, healthcare delivery models and healthcare services that really, just in general, align and combine with education a lot earlier. And we're finding that same thing. If education and higher ed does not really innovate to that, we're going to be left behind in that healthcare model too as we graduate these professionals. So again, not a specific, but looking outside of that academia for the innovation.
If I may, it's interesting in healthcare. I assume we all have had the experience that we go to a clinic in the corner. That's a new provider. That didn't used to be the case.
Yep. Henry?
You know, I really admire what Michael Crow's doing at ASU. I think he is, in a parlance of Clay Christensen, he's identified the job to be done, equally in scholarship and student success. And that you could do both of those simultaneously is remarkable, but I think he's been very, very focused on what is the job to be done, what kind of research matters, what kind of organizational structure will allow us to do that research most efficiently. And he's done the same thing with students producing, you know, future graduate students and Rhodes Scholars. At the same time, he's serving a community college type of student. He just really understands the job to be done.
So let's flip the question now and say, what are you most skeptical of? What's getting buzz in the halls here and elsewhere, or trends that you read in Inside Higher Ed or wherever else that you're like, it feels like hype, I'm skeptical of it?
More than anything specific, everybody's trying to introduce technology in the learning process and management. And I guess it's part of the process that you have to let 1,000 flowers bloom to see which one works. But there has to be so much, many of those things are not scalable. And I think, as you mentioned, if you are not decreasing costs and increasing outputs, you really shouldn't be in the business.
Yeah, I would say related to that in the technology arena, it's one thing we haven't talked a lot about here is the faculty and the academic piece of this, and the technology that doesn't start with just that learning as it relates to faculty and academic quality and teaching. I think we're going to run up against some barriers, and we've got to do a better job of intertwining those two things.
I think one of the things I'm worried that I'm not hearing in the halls is the sort of the global construct more frequently of education. I think that, and I'll try not to let my politics show, as I'm answering the question, but I think that, our opportunity for our learners, wherever they're from and wherever they're learning, to be placed into a variety of different settings that creates an appreciation for difference is fundamentally a part of what education is. And the conversation is not pervasive in our thinking, and that worries me. And I think it should be in all sectors, in all conversations, because there's so many different sectors that do so many things better in some ways and not as good in others, that if we can bridge some of the sector conversation and see our relative value in a stronger overall higher education and educated people, I think it's just a stronger world for us. That may sound too up there, but it really is. We have to keep reminding ourselves why we're doing this.
So I'll give you two quick lightning round ones.
Sounds good.
So the first one would be, I don't think higher ed is moving fast enough on measurement and transparency of outcomes. We need to go faster. The second thing, which is a little closer to home for us, is there's lots of conversation about competency-based learning as an exciting model, and there are many coming in, saying they're competency-based, but they're really different shades and varieties of competency-based learning. And one of the things I worry about is it gets watered down by lighter approaches, and so I think we've got to be able to figure out how to distinguish between something that's called competency-based because it's self-paced versus something much more robust like direct assessment.
Yep. Henry?
I don't think I can add anything more.
All right. So then let's switch to policy and think about higher education reauthorization, or the reauthorization of HEA. It was going to happen in 2017 or 2018. Curious your take.
It is?
I'm asking you. I'm asking you.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Do you think it'll?
Well, I mean, it's a very,
I mean, a new
it's a very
construct,
unsettled,
right, would be
it's a very
helpful.
unclear environment right now, right?
Yep.
So I just would say where we spend our time at Capella is trying to work closely with the department and the Hill on trying to advance innovation and new models. So I'll sound like a broken record, but I think there's hope that the revised HEA could include language which would, I think, accelerate the adoption of direct assessment, concept-based learning. Those are the kinds of things that we spend our time working on. Whether it happens as one big bill or it happens in chunks over time, I think that remains to be seen.
Remains to be seen. Others?
Look, I think in terms of policy, primarily for-profit, but I think across the education landscape, we have an opportunity, while there's a lot of uncertainty, we have an opportunity here to be a part of the dialogue, and I think that that is the opportunity. What concerns me is making sure that we don't respond to this in a way of sort of, okay, we've gotten a little break, if you will, as it relates to how we look at policy. We've got the year-round Pell and et cetera, here, and that we look at this and remain really focused on, again, regardless of the politics, that we may remain really focused on students come first, and that we are driving for protection for students. We just want to do it in a way that is doesn't stifle innovation and allows us to continue to deal with the affordability issues, for students and student outcomes. And I think, there is a danger that it could swing the other way, and we're seen as not, amenable to protections for students, which is certainly not the case for us and probably everyone on there.
I'm so glad to hear that. I think you are right on target. My fear is that we may end up throwing the baby with the bathwater. Regulations are bad. Let's move on. Regulations, if they impact me negatively, they are bad. If they protect me, they are good. So there is always two perspectives. Of course, they have to be streamlined, etc. I'm skeptical that Congress will agree on anything in the next 2 years. I hope to be wrong. So we are not counting on any major changes allowing for more flexibility coming from Washington. I think the point you made is critical. We need to continue as a society, as public policy. It is about the outcomes, and it is about the students. It's not about throughputs. If we keep our mind on that, our focus on that, I think we'll be okay.
I think we've benefited tremendously, at least in my case. I'm very glad to have the college scorecard and that focus on outcomes. And I've got my own internal goals set on that basis. We're doing well in some things, and I'm going to focus, after a great presidency of Clark Gilbert, on those areas where we can get just a little bit better. And I think that we're very indebted to the Obama administration for the creation of that scorecard.
Great. So I've clearly not run out of questions, but we have run out of time. So if you join me in thanking these excellent panelists for a great conversation.
Thank you so much.